ME-CFS patients and long COVID patients and those with related illnesses often say that if they take a supplement called D-Ribose, they tend to feel significantly better. And I myself have also taken this supplement and benefited from it. Indeed, I would say that at times its effect has been quasi-miraculous. So in this video I'm going to be talking all about why it is that D-Ribose can help so much with illnesses like ME-CFS, my own personal experience, and I'm also going to be talking about my concerns about D-Ribose and why I'm not sure it's a good idea to take too much of it and for too long, and about why I am now coming off the supplement. But first, if you are new to this channel, my name is Patrick Usher and I'm an ME-CFS patient, and this is a place where I share accessible explanations of the research into ME-CFS, long COVID and related illnesses, and in which I share treatment strategies that I am trying in order to improve my condition. If that sounds good to you, please do like and subscribe. So first and foremost, what is D-Ribose? Well, I have my own little packet of D-Ribose here. But basically, ribose is an essential part of the way in which the body creates energy. And so that process in the body is called the Krebs cycle. Now, it's very complicated, but it involves the creation of something called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and the process by which the body can recycle ATP, so both creation and recycling. And ATP is essentially the currency of energy. It's what gives your muscles energy. It's what gives every process in the body energy, your heart pumping and the brain function. All of these things ultimately rely on how much ATP you have. And ribose is a precursor to ATP. So there's kind of a sequence of events, but ribose turns into adenosine triphosphate. So when you have a supplement which is called D-Ribose, the D signifies that this is a synthetic form of ribose. It's made in a lab, but it has the same chemical structure as the ribose that your body creates on a day-to-day basis. And in a situation like ME-CFS, where the Krebs cycle is impaired, where you are not able to create adequate ATP, this could make a hell of a lot of sense. It also makes sense in other conditions. For example, there's a cardiologist in America called Stephen Sinatra, treats patients with heart failure with D-Ribose. And that's because a lot of ATP is required in order for the heart to beat strongly and effectively. So he has found that his heart failure patients improve their ejection fraction rate, the capacity of their heart pumping, very significantly from taking D-Ribose. And so given all of what I've just said, it makes sense that this would be something that could help with ME-CFS as well. And indeed, back in the mid-2000s, Dr. Jacob Tettelbaum, someone who will be no doubt familiar to quite a lot of you, an ME-CFS doctor, he decided to try giving D-Ribose to his patients to see what happened. And he did a study about this, and the results were really positive. So here is the study, the use of D-Ribose in chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia, a pilot study from 2006. 41 patients with fibromyalgia or CFS were given D-Ribose at 5 grams 3 times a day, so that's 15 grams altogether. And the results were great. So approximately 66% of patients experienced significant improvement while on D-Ribose, with an average increase in energy of 45% and an average improvement in overall well-being of 30%. So now we have considered the rationale for taking D-Ribose for ME-CFS and the positive results in it and in other conditions. Now I'm going to talk about my own positive experience with taking D-Ribose. So I first took D-Ribose properly about 3.5 years ago, and at that time I was really ill. It didn't take much to crash me. I mean, really, it did not take much. It could be walking up a flight of stairs too quickly. It could be doing 5 repetitions of a physio exercise, and I would crash. So my situation was quite dire, and those crashes would last, 4 or 5 days. So I was walking on a knife edge, and the crashes were intense. My lips would go blue, and my standing blood pressure would go very high, and my heart rate. So maybe, 160 over 100 might be my standing blood pressure at those times, whereas when I wasn't in a crash, it would be much lower. And I was also quite stuck because I was really pretty unable to live independently. I was struggling enormously with this. I was in Dublin, I was living in my apartment, but I wasn't coping and I was hardly surviving, actually. It was a very low time in my life, and I knew that I couldn't manage and that I should try and leave and get to my dad who lives in France so that it would kind of simplify the various challenges that I was facing. But I wasn't well enough to travel. I was mainly housebound. I could maybe walk 2 or 3 minutes across the road and back again in order to go shopping, but that was not a guarantee. So I couldn't really see how I could actually manage a trip. And I just decided, I knew about the research into D-Ribose, and I said, look, I'll just do exactly what was in the study that I just mentioned. I will take 5 grams 3 times a day and see what happens. So that's what I did. Within 1 day, I felt profoundly better. I had colour in my face. I was feeling much more tolerant of getting around. And my blood pressure when standing actually normalised, which is extraordinary for 24 hours. And 1 week after starting the D-Ribose, I knew that I could manage the 2-day trip out to my dad, which was mind-blowing, really, the change. So I did that trip. At the end of day 1, I had to take quite a long walk through Paris Charles de Gaulle airport, and I crashed. I was staying in an airport hotel. I got into the bed and I thought, oh no, I'm going to have 4 or 5 days of hell now. But actually the crash lifted within 3 hours. And so that was the extraordinary difference that taking the D-Ribose made. And honestly, it felt like a miracle. And so what I found from that point on, which was March 2021, that if I was taking 15 grams of D-Ribose per day, my quality of life was just night and day different. I'm not saying I was well, I'm not saying I could go and do a long hike or anything like that. It's just that the possibility of descending into a nightmare was basically not there. Now, in contrast, if I dropped it down to 10 grams, then it was still quite easy to crash and things could go unpleasant pretty quickly. So there was something about taking 15 grams had a really solid effect on my quality of life. Basically, it would take an awful lot more to crash me and I would recover much more quickly. Interestingly, it's also something that my consultant in Ireland, who specialises in ME-CFS, he puts people on D-Ribose and says that they often say it's completely life-changing as well. So that's been his own clinical experience. And since that time 3 years ago, I have very rarely taken it for 15 grams a day. I have tended to try and establish a maintenance dose because at a certain point I was getting stronger and I didn't want to rely on it. So more typically I've taken somewhere between 7 and 8 grams per day, and in the last year more typically around 5. However, I do want to get off it, and I've actually been aware for all this time that there are, it seems to me, certain risks from taking D-Ribose that are not talked about enough. And so now we're going to come to what those risks might be. So D-Ribose is a sugar, but it's not like your standard table sugar. This is, of all the sugars that exist, D-Ribose is by far the most glycating. Now what does that mean? Glycation is a process by which sugars attach to proteins in the body and make them sticky. They kind of glycate them because sugar is sticky. So it sort of attaches to the protein, glycates it, makes it sticky, and then that protein becomes something called an advanced glycation end-product, or AGE. Having a lot of advanced glycation end-products is something that's strongly associated with developing dementia and Alzheimer's, because those sticky proteins end up getting into the brain and impairing its function. Now, D-Ribose is 50 times more glycating than standard sugar. Now, if you're therefore taking 15 grams of D-Ribose, well, you can do the maths. It's an awful lot more potential glycation and the creation of glycation end products. So obviously this is quite concerning if you are taking D-Ribose as a supplement. And there are actually studies looking into the effects of D-Ribose supplementation on mice and whether or not it leads to the creation of Alzheimer's-like deposits or dementia-like features in the brain. Now there are quite a few such studies, and you can easily find them just by searching D-Ribose dementia on Google. But here's a recent one from 2022, which was a kind of review, a meta-analysis of the various different studies done so far. So a systematic review and meta-analysis of cognitive and behavioural tests in rodents treated with different doses of D-Ribose. And what this meta-analysis concluded from looking at 8 different previous studies of 289 rats was the following. D-Ribose treatment caused cognitive impairment and cognition deteriorated with increasing dose. Furthermore, the increase in advanced glycation end-products in the blood and brain confirmed that D-Ribose may be involved in cognitive impairment through non-enzymatic glycosylation, resulting in the generation of advanced generation end products. So that's pretty clear. Now, we then come to all kinds of questions. What are the doses used for D-Ribose in these studies? How does that translate to the dosage that would cause similar problems in a human? In these studies, the doses tend to be kind of described as in terms of dose per kilogram of body weight, but that's quite misleading, because there are certain conversions you need to actually make in order to have the equivalent dose of what would be a problem in a human being. So I'm not sure that I have the answer for that. There's an interesting forum thread on an ME-CFS support forum, Phoenix Rising, which looks at this question. People were concerned about it, and someone managed to work out that in one of these studies that showed, Alzheimer's-like deposits in mice, the equivalent human dosage would be 24 grams of D-Ribose per day, assuming a typical body weight of, I think it was 70 kilograms. So don't absolutely quote me on that. I'm going to post that thread down below, but that is according to memory. It's also the figure that I arrived at some years ago when I was looking into all of this and trying to work out what the equivalent dosage would be. I worked out 24 grams. So when I was therefore taking 15 grams, well, that's a little bit too close for comfort, and that's why I dropped it down to 7-8 grams per day. And truth be told, I've never liked taking it ever since I found this research. But I've also been scared not to take it because of how ill I was before I was taking it. Now, on the flip side, one would assume if this was likely to cause Alzheimer's in general, a lot of ME-CFS patients, and not to mention other people who take ribose, would be developing Alzheimer's and dementia. Now, perhaps they just forgot to tell anyone, sorry about that, but it doesn't seem to be a phenomenon that's been noted. Now, I have come across one ME-CFS patient, again on the Phoenix Rising forum, who said that he'd been diagnosed with cognitive impairment, and he wondered if it was because of taking ribose for a few years. But of course we don't know what might be the cause in that patient's case. And also we don't know how long it might take for this to develop as a problem. There's also the point of, if you are ribose deficient because of ME-CFS or ATP deficient, how much ribose would you need to take in order to bring your ATP levels or your ribose levels up to what would be physiologically normal and healthy? Because sometimes when you're in this kind of situation, you need to ask yourself, go back to first principles, I'm worried about taking X, Y, and Z, but I am actually deficient in that. So what is the difference that I need to take it in order to get back up to healthy? And if I'm taking it such that I'm just making up the difference to get back to a healthy level, is that actually doing me any harm simply to have as much ribose circulating in my body as a healthy person would? So that's a counter-argument. And then we come to, well, what is a healthy amount of D-Ribose in the human body? And this is not something that I think has been definitively answered, and I looked so hard to try and find an answer to that question. Ultimately, I found a document by the Norwegian Food Safety Authority, which was looking at the safety of D-Ribose for adolescents and children. And what that document stated in the section on general information, and I'll put this down below, it stated the estimated endogen synthesis, so the creation within the body of D-Ribose is 2.7 grams a day for women and 16.5 grams a day for men. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that highly unlikely. How can it possibly be the case that women are supposedly living with, an almost sort of like death level of D-Ribose creation, and men are creating supposedly 7 times more ribose on a daily basis? I know that men and women have some differences, but we are still members of the same species, and it seems unlikely to me that that can possibly be correct. Nevertheless, the fact that, men have been recorded as producing, 16 grams of D-Ribose per day is somewhat encouraging. I mean, for example, if someone with ME-CFS were taking 5, 6, 7 grams per day of D-Ribose, it might be feasible that that's simply taking them back up to normal. But if someone's taking 15 grams, well, that sounds like you're heading way over what would be a healthy physiological dose. So I think there are some questions here that need to be teased out about what is a truly safe dose for someone with ME-CFS to take. In any case, my own feeling is this is not a risk I want to take, and so I'm really trying to get off it as my, function has improved so much. I have been taking 4 or 5 grams of D-Ribose for much of the last year with no real issue. Sometimes I take more when I'm in a crash, but at the moment I'm just down taking maybe 2 grams, and I just want to stop it and see how I do. Ultimately, I don't really like taking anything, but I have to admit this supplement did help me a lot. But ultimately, this is not a risk I want to take. I wonder if the best possible use of D-Ribose in general might be as a rescue remedy. So people maybe just take it when they're in a crash on a one-off kind of basis to help the crash lift more quickly. And it's certainly been my experience that that's what happens with it. Anyway, so that's it for this video. Leave your thoughts about D-Ribose down below. How have you found it? Has it helped you? Have you developed Alzheimer's since you've taken it? What are your thoughts on this kind of research? How do you think it should be used? Please leave your thoughts and experience down below.